Well, I want to welcome you again to There's Always a Way podcast. And I don't know what time of day it is. I'm still trying to figure out what time of day it is for our guest because she's in somewhere in the mother country. I don't know which part, but so it's at least a 5 hour time difference. But this is a remarkable lady. I promise you, when we start thinking about There's Always a Way, and of course, my wife's getting ready to do a series called Courageous Women. And this lady fits in. We actually had to really do a wrestling match, and I finally won that third and final fall. Who got to go first with Julia. But this is a lady that you're going to want to know. You're going to want to read her book. You're going to want to expose her to your world. And because I promise, when you hear the cause that's sort of captured her imagination and her heart, you're going to want to be a part of it. I want to welcome Julia Strachan, and newly married. And so, Julia, there's so much I want to say. Right now, you're the head of partnerships at Justice and Care, which is a great organization. I want us to talk about it because of what they're doing in the area of human trafficking. And I mean, the total package. So it's not just one aspect. When you get involved with a young lady, young man, a child, there's a big commitment there. So I want to give you an opportunity to tell us about that remarkable organization. You're a world record Atlantic rower, and you're the author of an incredible book that our students at Student Leadership, and I want everyone to know that I first met Julia. She was this Sky Sports reporter, and I'd seen the one of the shots of her, and this attractive young woman. And I'm really wrestling with, is this, we've had Churchill's grandson, Sir Nicholas Soames, members of the royal family, House of Lords, House of Commons, the head of NATO. And I'm going, is this going to be a weighty enough, subject? Again, speaking out of ignorance, limited frame of reference, hadn't met you, hadn't heard you. But within about 15 minutes of you standing up in front of about 350, 400 American students, I realized right then and there, this was somebody not only was that I was supposed to have pour into our students, this was someone that we were going to want to have every time we got a chance. So Julia Strachan, it's so good to see you. And I'm so proud of this remarkable, what you did was a record setting. We'll talk about that, but more than that, what you're doing. And so welcome to There's Always a Way.
Thank you, Jay. It's a joy to see you, and we've journeyed over many years. And I think, I don't know how many years ago I was in Florida and saw Diane there, and that was incredible. But some of those years that I had the privilege of sharing my story to your students, it has stayed with me, and I was so inspired by them and their questions and their journey. So it's a joy, and I just love the name of your podcast. There is always a way, Jay. There actually is.
I appreciate you saying that, because guess what? The very first question we ask every one of our guests, and Julia, with your, you've been on the field, literally the playing field with some of the most popular athletes in the world in your role with Sky Sports. You've been around a lot of famous people, a lot of the quote beautiful, you've got all that in your resume. But Julia, with this remarkable accomplishment, this world record, you and four other ladies rowing across the Atlantic on the slave route. We're going to get into all that. But not only is that such an incredible accomplishment, but so with all of your background, and what you did, and now what you're doing literally around the world, I can't think of anybody better to ask the question, what's the first thing that pops into your mind, or when you read the phrase, there's always a way?
All I want to say is yes and amen. There is always a way, Jay. And with God on your side, there's always a way. It may not be the way that you dreamed of or expected, but that's generally God's way. I had this dream of rowing the Atlantic. I was a prodigal, then came back to my faith at 27. And after a year of God really working some stuff out in me, for the first time in my life, I just was like, wow, there's more to life than me, myself, and I. What can I do, Lord? And then I watched the film Taken. Long story short, it led to me looking at what was in my hands. What are my skills? What are my talents? What are my areas of influence? How can I make a difference? And an initial half marathon turned into my best friend having this crazy idea to row across the Atlantic. And instantly I knew that was symbolic of the transatlantic slave trade. She pulled out, but I ended up putting together this crew of girls. And if I knew what lay ahead, Jay, in the 2 years that, this adventure unfolded, preparing for it, actually doing the crossing and post-row, I mean, I honestly would have given up, but I knew that it was a God adventure. And if he calls you to it, he will see you through it. Generally, you go around the mountains and across the oceans and, everything that you didn't expect. And my mum was sick, literally the very week that I said, yay, I'm going to row the Atlantic in my complete naivety. My mum suffered a massive mental breakdown. So, with all these public victories, there's always private battles. So I was caring for my mum, going to a psychiatric ward after, being at work since 4 a.m. in the TV studio, fundraising, raising awareness, leading this crew, trying to tell the world about slavery because, then people didn't really know about human trafficking. And, God, and then actually during the crossing, I had Bible verses all over my cabin, but, God can part the oceans. He can, see you through fire. And it was so hard, Jay, but the fortitude, the resilience, the person, the stuff that God wants to get, out of you is so character building, and you hate it, but it's the good stuff. And in our race, there was a boat, this couple who rowed the Atlantic. If you could row the Atlantic as a married couple, you could do anything in life. I figured, but this couple who rowed the Atlantic in our race, their boat was called Dream It, Do It. And that's kind of become the motto in our life, because anybody can dream a dream. Somebody might dream of starting a podcast or starting a shelter or helping the homeless, like whatever, sets your heart on fire. But the doing part, there is no secret formula. It's simply grit. It's having this whatever it takes attitude and resolving not to give up. And Jay, when the setbacks come, the challenges come, the 50-foot waves of adversity, that, these waves that come at you, most people down tools, they down oars, and they fail to reach their full destiny and potential. They fail to make it to the other side. And so this doing, you just got to do it, and do it afraid even. But there is a way, and come hell or high water, I was going to get to the other side. And by the grace of God, we did. But it was, and you know what? I would rather have failed trying than failed to try at all at Jay. Nobody would have wanted to hear about 5 girls. We wouldn't probably be sat here if it was 5 girls who nearly made it to the other side. So wow. That was the grace of God.
Well, first of all, I know there had to be a lot of hell and a lot of discouragement, all those things. Sounds almost like a sermon, the giant of fear and the giant of adversity, but there are real giants. There were physical challenges, as well as, of course, the emotional and the spiritual. And then just trying to keep 5 individuals performing as a team. But so, Julia, let me back up and ask you this question. Not only you and these 4 ladies finished this remarkable endurance test. It was a record time, and you had done something that others had never done before. And now, what's so fascinating to me is how you've kept that going. So I want to go back to that one moment. I heard you tell a story. I've heard you speak several times, And of course, you've got Bear Gill writing the foreword to your book, Row for Freedom, Crossing an Ocean in Search of Hope, an incredible account of one woman's record-breaking row across the Atlantic. But I love what part of what Bear said about you. When you're in the middle of an adventure, you just have to live it. When you're on an expedition, you put your head down and you battle through. The storytelling comes after the adventure, after you've crossed the finish line. Now that time has come, and Julia can tell her story, the full story. What a story. Now, first of all, I'm very jealous that you got Bear to write your foreword. He's one of the most beloved individuals here in the States, in the colonies, as well as in the mother country. He's just this phenomenal individual, larger than life. So once again, so in this incredible journey, I remember in the book and then hearing you with the story, it all really started with a meeting you had with a young lady at an airport.
That's
Can you
right.
tell us that?
Yeah, Alejandra, she, through a friend who knows this lady in Mexico who was part of the government there, she had a safe house. So she actually brought this survivor, Alejandra, to the UK, to this women's conference. And I had the privilege of meeting her at the airport. And she was the first survivor of human trafficking that I had ever met. And I just remember her telling me that she was born and raised in Mexico City to a very ordinary home family, and they weren't poor, they weren't rich. Often it is the vulnerable who are the most likely to be trafficked, but she actually just went to the north of Mexico for a better job with better opportunities, and it wasn't a legitimate job. She was broken in, raped repeatedly until her psyche was broken down. She was degraded, and she told me how, she was just this beautiful girl, early 20s, gorgeous, South American, beautiful girl. And just, when you see someone on a screen, but when you actually meet them, and I just took her hand when she said to me, I was degraded, and she was passed from pimp to pimp, brothel to brothel, and she was urinated on. And she said they tried to scare her and chuck scorpions on her. Things that, and degraded and forced to do things that nobody should ever have to do. And I just wept. And I said to her, Alejandra, I told her I was doing this row, and I said, I'm dedicating this row for freedom for you. Wow. And it felt like something out of a movie. She literally took out her earrings before, we said goodbye to each other, and just put them in my hand and just said, Julia, these are for you to remember me. And I did a TED talk a year ago, and I wore those earrings, and I actually started crying at the end of the talk because, she was the reason that I kept going. When you're in the adventure and your head is down, as Bear said, and you just keep rowing when it's tough and there's nothing else to do but just keep going. And Alejandra was the reason at 2 a.m. when I didn't want to keep going and I just wanted to be miraculously away from the mid-ocean. And she was the reason I kept going. And I thought, Julia, what's worse? Servicing 40 men tonight or just rowing another 2 hours? And whatever you might be facing in life, it might seem insurmountable. It might feel like you're never going to get there or your situation's never going to change. But just take it. 3,000 miles was overwhelming. 4, 5, 6, 7, however many weeks at sea we were going to take, it was too overwhelming. But just 2 hours by 2 hours, watch by watch, stroke by stroke, we got there. And just keep, some days just stand, but just put one foot in front of the other and keep going, and you will make it to the other side. So she was my inspiration. She
so 2 hours on, 2 hours off. I remember you using that phrase.
Yeah.
Julia, if you can, and as only you can, in a few moments, let us have a sense of how crushing that event was. I mean, the toll, I mean, you not only have this huge burden in your mind about your mom,
Mm,
what she's
mm,
going through, and now you're probably not able to talk to her if, maybe once, if at all, you know, but
mm.
so what, you know, so I know you've got that going on, but then the actual, the months long, I mean, all those weeks, uh, give us a description of what a glamorous day would be. I know 2 hours on, 2 hours off. I remember that phrase, but
Yeah. So Jay, sometimes people say, "Oh, so did you like stop off somewhere?" And I'm like, "There's nowhere to stop off. There's no
Barbados,
island.
we had a little
There's
resort. Yeah.
there's nowhere." So we left from the Canary Islands, south of Spain, west of Africa, 3,000 miles to Barbados. It was a 7-meter boat, 23-foot long boat, two tiny cabins the size of our cabin was the size of a bit bigger than a coffin, so I couldn't sit up in it. All your food is on board. We had to be completely unassisted, unaided in order to get these 2 world records. And we were gunning to be the first female crew of 5, the fastest women ever to row the Atlantic. So we wanted to break sub 50 days. And we did do it in 45 days, but we were plagued by problems. The one bit of equipment you don't want to break, Jay, we didn't see another boat the whole way across. If you had to be rescued, it would be up to the nearest vessel to get you that could be 5 days away, and they might be going to Brazil or Canada or who knows where. So, but our water maker blew up and caught fire on day 14. So we had to hand pump water for a month, which no crew, I don't think, to this day has ever done. We had a satellite phone that we could keep in touch with all our sort of media, our sponsors. We decided not to speak to our friends and family for the first couple of weeks because we just wanted to mentally adjust. It was torture physically. Your body, Jay, will do what it's told to do, but your mind is where the problem lies. So we ate expedition foods. So when the sun set at sort of 5 o'clock, I just honestly cried because it just was like, I know what's coming. 12 hours of darkness. The darkness was horrendous. And when I was preparing to do this TED talk, and I was so busy, I was like, I don't know if I've got time to do it. And someone asked me, Julia, what was the worst thing about the row? And I said, the dark. And that became the sort of basis of my talk, because, you know, the darkness of slavery. But then Jay, at 2 a.m, the stars would come out, billions of stars like you have never seen, and I probably will never see, just magical. And then a shooting star, you know, this light shone in the darkness. The moon would light our way. We were in 50-foot waves the size of houses a lot of days. And the toilet, on a more light-hearted note, was simply bucket and chuck it. So you're in 15-meter waves trying to balance on a bucket. Our bottoms were like pepperoni pizza, boiled, sores, pussy, horrendous. It was, you know, we sang a lot on the boat. We had 2 full-on Christians, 2 atheists, and 1 agnostic. So we were a mix. But, you know, one day Debbie, who's is atheist, and she said to me, Julia, your prayers just sent me off to sleep. They really soothed me, you know, because me and Kate, the Christians, would row together. We were just praying, and she said it soothed her to sleep. So happy days. But it was, you know, it was highs and lows. It was like life, you know. You could be surfing the waves there. You're in the pit the next day in the trenches. But I feel so privileged, Jay, to have done that. I did this, I hope, to help other people. But what it has done in me has been probably greater. But there isn't a week that goes by that someone doesn't reach out to me, whether they've read the book or listened to a podcast or whatever. And this girl, 10 years old, I podcasted on her show on Friday. She's 10 years old, all about confidence. And, you know, the story many years on is still going, but that's just simply because it's a God story. Like it is, you know. If it was just a Julia story, it would have fizzled out years ago. But there's just so much that I guess people can relate to, and yeah, it's just a privilege to share it.
It's one of the most fascinating reads, one of the most incredible stories. Row for Freedom, and we'll have that obviously on our podcast. Everybody can we'll get you have this information, so please take advantage. You'll want your kids to read this book. And you say, well, I don't know about the subject matter. Let me just share something. How severe is, I mean, I know in your role now is, you're forming all these partnerships for care, for justice and care, this organization. But give us a picture of how severe and devastating she really is.
Yeah, I remember sort of 12 years ago when I first learned about human trafficking, and I remember I worked at Sky Sports News, but I remember banging on the door at Sky News, slavery still exists. We have to do something, and they were just like, Julia, what are you going on about? Just go away, maybe not that harshly, but they just didn't get it. And then actually that was the point of the Row, was to tell the world about slavery. And a couple of hundred years ago, when the great British abolitionist William Wilberforce was fighting, dedicated his life to fighting what we know as the transatlantic slave trade route, there was about 12.1 million slaves taken from Africa to the Americas. And actually today, or when I learned about slavery about 12 years ago, they estimated 27 million to be in slavery, but the figure is more accurately 40 million people in slavery today. And these are people who could be your brother, your sister, your mother, your daughter. These are ordinary people hidden in plain sight down the roads that we walk by, the neighborhoods that we live on. I mean, I lived in London just before I got married, and there were sort of 300 brothels estimated to be in just the one small area of London that I lived in. And in the UK, they estimate that there's 100. I mean, no one ever knows, but it's probably the tip of the iceberg. But they estimate that there's about 100,000 in the UK. But in Southeast Asia, of course, is a big hub for slavery, but it exists in the leafy, nice suburbs of New York, of Orlando, in Texas, in California. It is rife. It's on our doorstep, whether it's the domestic slaves in the homes and the houses that you walk by, whether it's your nicely made rug that you buy from your department store that's made by child slaves in India, the chocolate that we consume by children picking cocoa beans on the west coast of Africa. It is everywhere. And we can't all do everything, but we can all do something. And for me, it's always, what's your something? How can you make a difference? And even if it's not fighting human trafficking, we have to make a difference. So whatever, whether it's homelessness or climate change. And actually, I recently got married, and actually the recycling is really bad. I live in this little island called Jersey. We're actually nearly on the same line as Paris. So we're part of the UK,
one of the
but quite far down.
Right? Yeah.
Channel Islands. And actually the recycling is so terrible here. And I'm just mortified that we don't recycle properly here. So I'm just like, right, we need to change this. I'm going to get campaigning about, and I'm not a big sort of environmentalist, but, where you see need. And if you're wondering, what is my purpose? How can I serve? Or I wish I could make a difference. The fact is you can. And, I didn't set out to do anything big. I just was available and just said, God, use me. Like, what can I do to make a difference? And actually God leads you on the most phenomenal adventures when you it's just one step by step. And then the God adventures are the most thrilling and exciting, the hardest, but the best.
Wow. Incredible story, incredible accomplishment. The only thing, Diana and I were talking, the only thing positive really that I know has come out of this COVID pandemic is the fact that several, and this is a man and is a male and one of those sports lovers. I know you love sports, but it is horrifying to learn that these events that we think real men would want to go to, whether it's premiership, the championship games, whether it's the NBA All-Star game or the finals of the NBA. Basketball is becoming a global phenomena. American football, we're about to have our Super Bowl. The only benefit, these sporting events, people are brought into those cities that host those events by the thousands.
They are.
And the immorality and the abuse and the crime against humanity and young girls and boys and girls, it's beyond comprehension. So sometimes you read these descriptions in the Bible where God says, this is what man's heart is like. And it sounds, well, I don't know anybody like that. I promise you, you do know somebody like that.
Yeah.
You just don't know that part about them. So the only benefit I know of COVID is at least some of those events have not taken place, or if they have, there'll be 5,000 able to be in attendance because of, quarantining, etc. So this
Jay,
is
I was actually in South Africa before the World Cup, and by chance, this was at the beginning of starting to do talking about the row, and actually I got to, long story short, got to go to a safe house where girls were being brought in preparation for the World Cup. So whether it was internally trafficked from South Africa or neighboring countries, Zimbabwe and so on, and being brought in and exploited. So exactly that. I think the Super Bowl is the biggest event in the US, and actually the demand for hotels goes up because mainly men descend upon those cities, and like a South Africa where men will just descend on all these different cities. The demand for hotels goes up, the demand for food goes up, the demand for sex goes up, and that's why it's all supply and demand. So it is horrendous, Jay, and actually that's why it's my greatest privilege to now work. I had a charity, Sport for Freedom, that all went now under Justice and Care. I went to India in 2018 to see their work, and Southeast Asia, India especially, Bangladesh. So we were in India for the first 10 years, rescued 5,000 men, women and children. But Jay, the thing is, you can rescue, and girls will just keep getting replaced. It's not just girls, men and young boys I met as well, who are exploited in construction and agriculture and farming and so on. But the reason I put sort of my work all under Justice and Care is because everything they do, yes, the rescue is important. We're embedded within many of the police forces alongside the police. So our victim navigators work alongside the police in the UK, whereas in India we had investigators who had to go and do a lot of the things that the police didn't do there. We have the legislation in the UK, as do you in America. And the unique thing about Justice and Care is that we bring those perpetrators to justice, because you can keep rescuing, but we dismantle these criminal networks and we bring those kingpins, those perpetrators to justice. And then everything that we do is to bring systemic change at the highest level. So the reason we have our Modern Day Slavery Act in the UK is really because of the work of our chairman, Christian Guy, who will be the Prime Minister one day. He's phenomenal. Social justice. He was David Cameron's social justice advisor at Number 10. Phenomenal man. And we still give loads of recommendations to the government, of which many have been taken. And that is how and then the victim care, they trust our victim navigators. They get the intel, they get the intelligence, which they don't want to give to the police because they're too scared of them. And then they are able to go and bring the perpetrators to justice. So I'm so passionate about justice and care, but there's wonderful organizations. So we're in Romania, in Bangladesh, we've started in India and actually throughout the UK. And our goal isn't to become an organization of hundreds of people. We are a lean machine. We're a small team. You look under the bonnet and, if you're an investor, your return on investment is big, because we are a lean machine, but bringing that systemic change at the highest level.
Well, whether you're a student, a youth pastor, a pastor, businessman, professor, university student, housewife, are running 4 or 5 major corporations, and we have a pretty eclectic group on this podcast. I just want you to know, do for one what you wish you could do for everybody, and get started. And whether it's writing that paper at school, whatever. So we're going to have the information. You see it on your screen as you listen, as you watch this, and we'll give it, of course, as you listen. But I want you to reach out to Justice and Care. I want you to reach out to Julia, and I want you to find out what you can do. And of course, Julia, Diane started this amazing really kind of a movement, but it's called She Loves Out Loud. And when I hear you talking and you're trying to love out loud, and even though you did it in the middle of the ocean and no one saw it but the Lord, now the whole world's beginning to hear about that row and what took place on that little boat. So you're a tremendous hero, heroine, friend.
I call them sheroes.
Sheroes. Oh, okay. All right, man.
That's my word,
daughters
sheroes.
will love that.
Yeah, they're your sheroes.
Yeah. Well, Julia, thank you for your time. I can't wait for us to be back in person with hundreds of students, and we would sure love to get you trapped on that little island there. And thank you for your time.
Wait.
And congratulations.
Thank you, Jay. Bless you.
Bye-bye.